Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna and I'm a psychologist specialized in emotional and binge eating. And for 20 years I have indeed battled the problem of emotional and binge eating and being stuck in the restrict binge cycle, which means that I was going from not eating or not eating enough, over-exercising, and then I would binge as a consequence of that behavior. Along with that, being an emotional eater meant that I was eating also large quantity of foods due to emotional reasons, something that had absolutely nothing to do with physical hunger. So here are the key 5 steps that I had to take in order to be free from the restrict binge cycle, from dieting, from binge eating for the past 12 years. So number 1 is acknowledgement, which I know sounds a little bit strange to say as a step, but you have to admit to yourself that the main reason why you are binging is not because you're lazy or you're not motivated or you are feeling out of control and something is wrong with you when it comes to food, but to actually acknowledge that either you're eating for the reasons that have nothing to do with hunger, or you are constantly dieting to the point of being starved, and then as a direct consequence you just cannot stop eating once the food is presented. So acknowledging that binge eating is a direct consequence of either unresolved emotions or dieting was number 1. And I would say the number 2 is getting rid of any diet culture mentality when it comes to my personal eating. So what that meant in a very concrete way, I stopped with any kind of meal plans. I ditched all my apps that will tell me how much I need to eat, how much I'm allowed, do I need to burn off certain calories. I didn't care. I had to go back to what I feel rather than what's expected or not expected by someone else. No more food rules, meaning if I want to put the whole banana in a smoothie, I will do it. And if I want to have carbs for lunch and dinner, I will do it. And if I don't want to burn it off in the morning, that's how it's going to be. You cannot have physical or mental restrictions around food, what you should be eating, in what quantities, at what time, and think at the same time that you can heal. Any type of restriction is something that will end up in a binge. And that ended up for me as well. So I just knew that at some point I had to make things a little bit different. No more this idea that some foods are allowed or not allowed, or some foods are bad or good, because that puts you also in a mindset that you cannot eat certain foods, and because they're bad, right? They make you gain weight, like they're full of sugar and all this kind of stuff. But then at the same time you binge on them. So how come that then on those days they're not so bad? I understood that that's actually not my thinking, because I actually believe that from time to time having something sweet will be fine. But then the diet culture told me, no, it's never okay to have it. And then because of that, just like many of you, you binge on certain days exactly on those foods that you restrict yourself. So removing any kind of food stigma, diet culture mentality was definitely step number 1. Step number 2 was the understanding of fasting. You guys, I used to fast, but not for the purpose of autophagy, cell renewal, cognitive, better performance. I was fasting to lose weight. And, when you think about it, it just means not eating. I was fasting since 1995. I know what it is. But when you have eating disorder tendencies, you will easily hide behind the fasting. And so what you will say is like, oh, I'm fasting for autophagy, but actually just don't want to eat. Or if you're in a binge eating phase, you will binge in those allowed window hours. Neither of them are good. So I had to acknowledge that I had to have 3 meals without diet rules. Step number 3, how did I make those meals? How did I become a more intuitive eater? Well, I decided that probably a person that eats intuitively doesn't really think that much in advance. So when I would feel physical symptoms of hunger, I would eat. And the same would go for lunch and for dinner, and then, the next day, to having 3 regular meals. And for me, because I didn't want to be obsessed with food and what I can and cannot have, I was creating meals in such a way that they were a little bit repetitive in the beginning, but I would put out of 21 meals, 3-4 meals that were a little bit less nutritious, that I know for a fact if I restrict on them, I will want to eat it, once the diet is over. So then from time to time, it's with something sweet or a pizza or a burger, or if I was avoiding bread, then I would put bread. Spreading it out throughout the week, my mind was calm. I was not gaining weight, which was my biggest fear, because I didn't have the notion that these foods will not be allowed. Giving yourself the permission, full permission, and actually enjoying the foods while you're eating it instead of, bashing yourself for what you have done, is the key if you want to heal your relationship with food. You cannot eat and at the same time tell yourself stories like, why have I done this? This is wrong. This is bad. I'm being, out of control, because that's how you're going to act then. So you have to make meals that are more or less flexible, and that also, if the way you eat like that you can actually participate in life. You can go out, you can order food, someone can cook for you. So you make 3-4 meals that are not necessarily your own point, quote unquote, healthy meals, but it calms your brain that you cannot have those foods. Number 4, I absolutely had to pay attention to my triggers and emotions that normally I was running away from, numbing myself with food, distracting myself with food, because triggers are every day present in your life, and sometimes you don't even notice them, but they come back. Like, you can eat as much food as you want to fill in an emotional void, but if it's not hunger, food will not solve the problem. So you eat, but then the boredom stays. You eat, but the stress stays. You eat, but the loneliness stays. And so I had to start writing down very clearly, like, what triggers me? What am I feeling? Sit with it, and then figure out what I can do differently instead of eating. And really the understanding that if I overeat, if I binge, I'm trying to fill in an emotional void, there is no end. There is no amount of food that I will be able to eat that I will say, okay, now the void is filled in. That doesn't exist. So you have to practice those steps very clearly, literally writing them down. Like, it triggers me when this person says this. It triggers me when I step on the scale. It triggers me when I cannot put my favorite clothes in front of the mirror, when I watch, social media videos of very fit people. Whatever it is, just do it so that you kind of understand, okay, maybe this I need to avoid for a while. I don't want to step on the scale. I want to turn to more how I feel. I will wear different clothes. You have to find your ways, but food will not be the answer. The last thing, which I think is very important, is something that I have picked up along the way from family, diet culture, environment, media, and that's changing the mindset around food and dieting. For the longest period of time, I was in the all or nothing mentality. So one cookie would turn into a bag of cookies because, the cookie is not allowed on a diet. So if you already had one, then the day is ruined. Then just have the whole bag. And the same would go for any of those, let's say forbidden foods or more unhealthy foods. Categorizing food as good or bad and categorizing yourself as good or bad based off what you're eating puts you always in a position of failing. Because you will not be able to sustain a very rigid diet. And then when you take that cookie or you take that, square of chocolate, which technically in terms of calories, nothing will happen. But then you eat the whole bar of chocolate or you eat the whole bag of cookies. And then you say, you see, it's the problem with the cookies. No, you have restricted on those foods, and that is the problem. And so in that sense, I feel that I have changed my mindset by allowing those foods in my diet with the plan that I shared to kind of remove the stigma of those foods being bad, unhealthy, because if I eat them in a very, very moderate way, they will not affect my health, they will not affect my weight, they will not affect my mood. What will affect is when I say no to them, and then I binge, and then I feel guilty for binging, and then I decide to go on another diet. And that's how you enter the restrict binge cycle. Those were my personal steps of how I helped myself in terms of, binge eating and ending emotional eating. If you have some questions, please leave in the comment below.